Hi everybody! In this video I will show you the steps needed for convenient remote monitoring and control of your solar energy production via the SolarWeb app, respectively www.solarweb.com. We will also run through the process of physically installing, respectively replacing the core component needed for that, the data manager, also called data logger. Next, we will take a look at how to configure that data manager as to get your local solar production data displayed online, respectively via your SolarWeb app. Let me mention that no historical data of your solar installation is lost, should you be watching this because you need to exchange the data manager. As a matter of fact, the only thing that changes after the reconfiguration is that the new data manager starts handling the communication between inverter and the SolarWeb cloud. That has no effect on data that has already been transferred to SolarWeb before. The data manager is an internet connecting device. Without it, your inverter is reduced to a local DC-AC electricity exchanger. That is, you will still be producing renewable energy from the sun, but data about how much you produce when will only be available locally via your inverter screen, respectively via local USB stick data logging, whereas data stored on the USB stick will not be conveniently accessible. That is, the data manager will allow you convenient anytime access of your solar production data and capacity via the internet. Okay. What are the possible reasons or use cases to install, respectively, to replace the data manager? Use case number one is your inverter has no data manager installed so far and you want to install it to monitor and control your energy production, respectively consumption via the internet, respectively the SolarWeb mobile application. Or your inverter has the data manager installed but was not connected so far. Or you simply did not know that your inverter is capable of remote monitoring and control. Use case number two is to replace an old Data Manager 1.0 with the Data Manager 2.0, since version 2 supports the Fronius smart meter, which again is necessary for the smart metering of production, consumption, as well as making smart decisions of where to store the energy delta between current consumption and current overcapacity. If the sole intention is to produce electricity and leave all the surplus to the grid, then a Data Manager 1.0 is just fine for your production logging over the internet. Of course, same procedure if you want replacing a faulty data manager. Last but not least, you might come across some special situations like I did. I have exchanged the Data Manager 1.0 for the 2.0 in the past, but last time, after some non-essential internet-based reconfiguration of the data manager, Fronius SolarWeb would not want to show me the connected inverter anymore. I got in contact with Fronius support and have been following their instructions of reconfiguring the country settings of the inverter as well as restarting it. My rather simple solution to this strange problem finally was to exchange the installed data manager with the data manager of a second inverter of the same type that I've just bought. After trying various things, that turned out as a working solution. There might be other reasons why you would want to check, reset, or update SolarWeb settings as well. Firstly, remove the 4 screws that hold the front cover in place. Secondly, remove the front cover by lifting it on the lower side and then levering it out of those hooks on the upper side of the inverter. Now, remove the 1 screw that holds the data manager in place. Carefully remove the data manager from the slot. It might help to gently move it slightly to the left and to the right. Remove it by pushing the antenna part through the hole, as depicted. We're now looking at our productive inverter, where we want to build in the just before remove data manager card. To do so, we repeat the procedure before in reverse order. Next, we want to connect the data manager with the other locally available Fronius devices. Why do we want to do that? Check my other video where I explain how the Fronius smart meter and on-pilot optimize your self-consumption and self-sustainability by measuring your home's consumption and relaying the production overcapacity into heating, water, and/or battery storage. For the moment, no worries. Also, if there is no cable, you will still be seeing your solar energy production curve via the SolarWeb app. Bottom line, for those of you who have the cable, connect it back via the 3 pins. I'm using a standard cable. It works, but I recommend using shielded cables as we know them from network technology. Next, let's make sure the IP switch is in the position A, that is, left side. Position A enables the inverter's own Wi-Fi access point. The switch is tiny, best is to use a small screwdriver. Last but not least, let's mount the front cover again to complete the physical installation. Next, let's check whether the inverter's own Wi-Fi access point is available. Let's switch to the setup menu and then let's select the menu item Wi-Fi access point. If all is fine, the screen will show the SSID and the password of the inverter's Wi-Fi network. Now we turn to our laptop, respectively internet browser, and connect to the inverter's Wi-Fi network. I'm switching from my home Wi-Fi to the Wi-Fi as provided by the inverter. In my case, it is the Fronius _240 222.449 Wi-Fi. If you're connecting the first time, it will prompt you to enter the password. Please use the default password 12345678. Let's wait for the connection to be established, then let's type HTTP Datamanager. Note, the browser sometimes then switches to a www address, which is wrong. If that happens, try it again. Optionally add or remove the last slash. If you can't fix it, connect to HTTP 192.168.250.181. For now, let's leave other configuration options aside and change to the wizard menu. Here, let's select SolarWeb Wizard. In my case, since we're only exchanging the data manager, there is no need to change the configuration. For the initial configuration, please follow the same procedure. However, enter the respective data like installation name, etc. Same applies for step number 2. In step number 3, let's accept the terms and conditions and let's make sure that the 2 checkboxes in the left lower corner are selected. If we let them unchecked, there will be no transferring of data into SolarWeb. What we see here is the home Wi-Fi network configuration. Configuration is required as to later allow the inverter to communicate with SolarWeb via the home Wi-Fi network. In case of the initial installation, we have to select the proper Wi-Fi network as well as provide the correct password the respective Wi-Fi requires. Optionally, we can set a static IP address. I would recommend doing so because this will allow us to later directly access the inverter's configuration insofar as our laptop/web browser are currently located in the same home network. For this, we type HTTP followed by the here defined IP address. By the way, we can do the same with all other IoT devices like smart switches, etc. The inverter has the IP number .30, the kitchen light .31, the TV .32, and so on. It just makes it easier to handle your local devices that connect to your home Wi-Fi network. With the network connection configured, the inverter is connected to the internet via the home Wi-Fi network. However, at this moment we are still connected with the inverter's own network, aka access point. Therefore, the information pops up prompting us to switch our laptop's Wi-Fi connection to our home Wi-Fi to then access the inverter's wizard, so to speak, indirectly via our home network. Let's do that now. The IP switch we need to bring from position A to position B. Position A means access point inverter, position B means the inverter is accessible via the home Wi-Fi and the assigned IP address. Let's set the password. Service has more rights than admin, admin has more rights than user. Insofar as you are the same person, I propose you assign the same password for all of them, but therefore rather select a more secure one. In case of exchanging the data manager, we're already having a SolarWeb account. Therefore, we select Login at this stage. In case of the initial configuration, you might need to register for SolarWeb first. Now, what is left is selecting out of the following options: add a new solar installation, add a new data source, or exchange an existing data source. Adding a new installation means we're configuring a new installation, which is not the case here. Data source, on the other hand, means nothing else than data manager. We select add a new data source only in case if we add a new inverter and its integrated data manager to our existing installation. That's not the case either for our constellation here. We're replacing an old data manager with a new one. That's why in this case we select exchange an existing data source. Please note, although the inverter remains the same, it's still a data source change, as the data source is the data manager that is built into the inverter. The inverter, so to speak, is just that local device that turns DC power into AC power and has no knowledge about SolarWeb and the internet. When we switch over to SolarWeb, we see that the currently assigned data source still is the ID of the old data manager. The ID of the new data manager in this case is 240.222.449. Long story short, we select exchange data source since our SolarWeb installation and therefore a data manager are already registered with SolarWeb and we want to exchange that data source. We select the respective solar installation. Note, if you are running more than one installation, all of them will be listed here, no matter of their physical location. Next, we register the new data manager ID with SolarWeb by selecting to replace it with the existing one. Once we finish that, we're switched over to SolarWeb and can recheck via settings and components that the data source truly got changed to 240.222.449. Next, let's scroll down to check whether all other components like smart meter, home pilot, and inverter show up. Once again, the comparison before and after via the inverter's web interface. Before, it was the data manager with the ID 240.873.176 and the IP address 192.168.8.150. Now it's the data manager with the ID 240.222.449 and the IP address 192.168.8.29, again connected to the same components and serial numbers as before. Last but not least, let me mention something that might sound annoying. If you are registered with SolarWeb already, you can spare almost all of that. After you have locally built the new data manager into the inverter and have made sure the data manager can successfully connect to the internet via your home network, you can simply do the following: access www.solarweb.com, login, and switch to settings and then to components. There, select the already registered data manager and hit the replace button. A pop-up will appear prompting you to enter the ID of the new data manager. In our case, we entered 240.222.449 and confirm. Thereafter, the data manager is replaced. Anyway, since setting the data manager up, respectively exchanging it, is not so much everyday's work, I'd recommend sticking with the local setup. The step-by-step setup wizard will assure proper configuration.